Yeah, thank you, Cincy, and to the all the participants. In many ways, today's session feels like an expanded version of conversations that we in the committee have had for a while. I'll just say I'm imagining the word cloud that we're talking about here that is infused with this understanding of human plurality. We are not one people, we are not one community. We do not all have common interests necessarily, but we do inhabit a common world. And this framework in many ways talks about what is it going to take for us to be able to create communities that are built for everyone to thrive together, where it's an expectation that well-being and equity and racial justice and the things that are laid out in this framework in some ways are built by design. That is hard work, and our histories have never really lived up to that potential, but our future can. And I think that's really where some of the distinctions in the conversation I've already heard today. This isn't necessarily only about doing something or one thing. It's about doing lots of things with integrity and coherence, like doing it for real with devotion, like our lives and all of our lives, our future depend on it. That's where some of these distinctions matter. I loved what we just heard about the distinction between authority. Authority is not the same thing as having power to do things that none of us could really ever do alone, or the meaningful distinction between trust, believing you have it or assuming it's there, versus earning trustworthiness over and over again. And that may matter at an individual level. Like I, as a person, I have integrity, but my organization has a history that I didn't have a hand in necessarily. It has a future that rests on how we build it together. And so the Lloyd's point about individual practice in this versus organizational history and context matters immensely. We've talked about, Nina, I heard things about, having principles is one thing. Having pathways to be able to bring those principles to life is an entirely different enterprise. And of course, we've got longstanding champions who forever have been doing this work. And we need to acknowledge the traditions and ancestry that we're stepping into here. And there's also newcomers. We need people who haven't been thinking about this. Lloyd mentioned the moment that we're in is increasing attention to this. Lots of folks in the chat acknowledging that they are sitting in the midst of opportunities right now where this feels relevant and useful, and how can we make the most of this moment. So I am delighted to have 4 other colleagues from the committee here. We've got Merritt Felzine from the High Plains Research Network, Marita Jones, Executive Director of the Healthy Native Communities Partnership, Bert Pusch, who's a member and consultant at the Commonwealth Care Alliance, and Richard Zalvidar, who's founder and Executive Director of the WAL Las Memorias Project. So I really want to begin our dialogue today, and it's going to be too short, but each of you helped to guide the development of this conceptual framework. And one of the things that's unique about the process that we've gone through here is that we didn't just turn to what you would find in a library or a bibliography to try to repeat and summarize what we think. We brought our own life experiences to this. And so I'm wondering if you could share a story about things that you've done in your own work, in your own life, that come through as important concepts in this framework. What is it in your own life that actually has shows up in the concepts that we're putting forward in this framework? So we can start in any order, but I'm seeing Richard first on my screen. So Richard, what about you?
So let me see good morning to you, wherever you are. Let me see if I can answer the question. I just want to go back to real quickly the whole issue of trustworthiness, and power, because I like to say that a lot of our communities throughout this country have power, but they don't know it. A lot of our people that are out there in the front lines are talking about COVID-19. I saw a lot of innovation among community workers, right, who are out there finding ways to recruit people for vaccinations and COVID testing. They have power. And I think the one thing that we need to do is find a way to trust ourselves, trust our own voices and our leadership capabilities. But going on to our own personal experience in the organization, I think one of the programs that we created was an Act Now Against Meth Coalition, where we organized from the bottom up, brought people together, over 20 organizations, to address the meth epidemic in Los Angeles. And from that, we created a platform where we came up with 32 recommendations on prevention, treatment, and policy. Now we're working with the County Board of Supervisors to ask for an adoption of that platform or to finding ways to better serve our different communities out there in addressing crystal meth. And I think one is organizing, two is building collaboration, three is articulating our concerns and recommendations, and fourth is moving into action. I hope I answered it.
Yeah, that's lovely. Who else? How about Marita?
All right. Thank you. Yat Marita Jones and Chiet Twiddit in Schlant. There's a plan of Bashichin, but Anita Shichedo, Kia Anita Shanala, but Astanchle. So I am Dene Navajo from Shiprock, New Mexico, and really happy to join this panel. And something that, a story, I guess, that resonates with me with this project is around the medicine wheel. So a lot of the work that we do is grounded in the medicine wheel, always starting in the east direction and going to the south and the west and the north. And I represent, I think, the work that I do with Native communities all around the country. So even though we're based in Shiprock, New Mexico on the Navajo Nation, I get the honor of working with tribes all around the country. And I have learned so much. And I think, you know, that power conversation really sticks in my mind as well, is, you know, we had a leadership program that started in 2005. And to me, your comment, Richard, about people don't know they have power, it really resonated because the first time we took a group of 50 Natives to Washington, D.C. to learn more about the political processes. Stacy Bolin at the time from NIHB, National Indian Health Board, asked how many of you voted, and it was during a voting year and for the president. And probably out of those 50 people, probably 5 people raised their hand. And the questions they had was, or their conversation was, I didn't know that I could vote. And I didn't know that I could vote, you know, in national elections, in regional processes, and at the state level and county level. And that just brought that to mind when you asked that question, Bobby. And also that throughout my work for 20 plus years, it's, well, I think really trying to remind people that we have wisdom in our own communities. There are strengths that have sustained us through time immemorial, and that we need to acknowledge that. And I believe that we did have to cover up some of that traditional and cultural knowledge in order to survive to this time, and that now is the time to uncover that strength and those cultural values and traditions and bring them forth, because that is what has sustained us throughout this time. Yeah, thank you.
That's lovely. And I'm already seeing a strong connection with what Richard said about these hidden assets, but that may be hidden to ourselves, but also hidden from others because the circumstances haven't really been welcoming for that. Merritt, what about you?
Thanks, Bobby, and hello, everyone. So I'm Merritt. I'm in Sterling, Colorado, the land of the Oglala Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho. And this was such a pleasure to be part of this process. And to address Bobby's question around, you know, kind of how did our own experiences get woven in and guide the process? I first want to just state that the process had to create trust among us and also had to figure out how to share and give and value power. And so as you all know, and many of people have been chatting and the chat has been so rich, that's not an easy process. And so obviously this wasn't a quick nor seamless nor streamlined process. And I want to say that in many ways it was messy and it was complex and it was wonderful. Our own voices came through in that not only were we engaged in just sort of discussions, and oftentimes the discussions really ran, much like they've done this morning, and we would chase down an idea for as long as needed until people felt like their points had been heard and we could kind of collate that back and bring it back to the group. But we were also allowed to share personal stories and one-on-one opportunities to really embody the work that we had been involved in for, in some cases, decades, and to show how our own work, our own experiences, our own wisdom might be informative for the process of this conceptual model. And then finally, there were lots of different ways of learning. And so we used voice and conversation in rich discussions like this, but we also used opportunities to sort of take information, reflect on it, and write back what we thought was missing or what wasn't elevated enough or what was repetitive. And so I'm just, as I reflect back on this long process, complex, messy, long process, just the levels in which we were able to insert our experiences, our knowledge were really to be commended and allowed for within this own process a lot of trust, and to give kudos to those who were guiding this, the funders and NAM staff. They realized when they needed to really back off and back up and take more time, but they also were able to take complex information and sort of reorganize, let us readdress and rethink. And so it just was a really interesting process.
That's lovely. So many themes to return to. Bert, let's bring your voice in. What's your story?
I, as a person with the lived experience of disability, I have dealt with this almost all of my life, both personally and professionally. I've been thinking about this conversation, which is wonderfully rich and wonderfully deep. And I think one of the things that brought me into it was I did not accept the traditional story, if you will, or construct of disability early on. And because I didn't accept it, I didn't, if you will, fall in line and start believing things as if they were true about who I was, what I was capable of doing. And I've tried to bring that into all of my work. I think one of the first and most important things is to help people who are disenfranchised deconstruct those models that they've been told are true about them. And often they're not. People with disabilities are capable of doing a whole variety of things. We've seen that in the recent Oscars. But we don't really encourage folks to take a look at what truths, if you will, are guiding their self-impression of who they are and what they can do. And I think by doing that, by helping them deconstruct what they're being told they're capable of or what they're being told they can and can't do, I think we help them reconstruct value for themselves. I was a professor in the field of rehabilitation and I left it because what I found was that we had a lot of able-bodied white people, males mostly, who were interpreting studies by other able-bodied white people who were about people with disabilities. And when I got into the field myself, none of that was true. I mean, and maybe that's because I already have a different model. But I think one of the things we haven't talked about is helping people who are disenfranchised to look at and to ask questions about, not merely accept, the kind of constructs that have been built around who they are and what they are capable of doing and what their worth is. And I think by doing that, we give people a sense of agency. You can't empower people. You have to create opportunities for them to empower themselves. This is, people who have power rarely give it away. I mean, if you really think about this, right? We have all these groups that, we want to help this group, we want to help that group, but are they really giving them the power to be able to be self-actualizing and have agency in identifying solutions, identifying problems, identifying the matrix by which success will be determined and given the supportive resources they need to get there. Is that what we're really doing? Or are we just saying, oh, hey, I'm going to give you some money because I'm going to keep this power differential between us? And I think we have to stop those kind of things and really get people to think about the system they're put in and what they can accept, what they can't accept, and redefine it for themselves.
And one of the things implied by the design is that this is a dynamic, right? This is a constant flow, and I think all of you have spoken to that idea that this is a work in progress. Not only our understanding of what it takes to do this, but the experience of actually interacting with people across difference and being able to discern what have we learned and what have we done through iterative action, or in some cases inaction, and being able to admit when the master narrative doesn't match our experience, and being able to also act into that in ways that tell a new story, a story of human capability and agency. And so maybe let's turn to questions about what you think this work means for the kind of contributions that can happen in differently situated organizations, right? Hospitals are not the same thing as academic centers, are not the same thing as policy or service delivery organizations. But for people situated in different roles, what does this work mean for our ability to be, let's say, vigilant about learning from both lived and learned experience, building power together to do things we can't do alone, actually channeling investments toward the things that really matter? These are hard challenges that we all need to contribute to. So do you have thoughts about how organizational leaders can fulfill these principles in a world where we're constantly imperfect and muddling through in some ways toward a higher purpose? I'm seeing some heads nod. Merritt, I'm going to start with you on this one.
I don't know if I'm brave enough to speak to organizations and how they might use this. But I'm going to frame it this way. So I'm community. I'm not a doctor. I don't work in health research. I worked as community engagement, true community engagement. But I know what good community engagement looks like. And I know what not so good community engagement looks like. I understand all the muddiness and the inexact science in the middle, and that there's magic that happens and that there's also intention that happens. And what I love about what this process has done is it's tried to capture what's magical, relational, vulnerabilities, just sort of this natural sort of human gift to work collaboratively with a group of people, and tried to put it, and I think very successfully put it into a framework that now our organizations can actually respond to. And I'm so excited for everybody to start to see the body of work that's behind this model, because the depth and the richness of it, from which one can sort of dive in and figure out what do each of these components look like? How do you measure them? How do you access them? How do you actually sort of say, do we have it or not? That this is finally something that has pulled together bodies and bodies and bodies of work and immense effort from so many incredibly smart people and tons of history. And I think we finally have something that is very user-centric from both my level, working in the community, geographic community of rural America, to an organizational level that's trying hard to sort of walk the talk and hopefully pay for it at the same time.
Mm-hmm. That's nice. Marita, what's on your mind about this?
I too am really based in grassroots community work. So it just made me think about when I was first invited to join this committee. I was telling my colleagues that, I felt like a fish out of water. It was like, first of all, I'm not a research person. So my brain was just twisting, trying to figure out what everybody was talking about. I was like, I don't have any idea what you guys are talking about. But what drew me in was really the model. I like that Ayadola showed that how the visual of this concept developed. And I think I met first with Kim Irwin, and when she showed me the model, I think that was my first contribution. I was like, that does not resonate with me, and it doesn't make sense to me. And so I think that was really helpful to me in helping to draw me in and to participate. And I've learned a lot. But what brought to mind your question was, I work also with Indian Health Service at the Shiprock Service Unit on Navajo area Indian Health. And they really have some awesome people there that are really trying to engage their medical staff to learn more about the Navajo communities that they serve. And one of the ways that we're partnering together is to figure out how to keep more of the doctors at Shiprock. So most of the doctors come and do their rotation, or, they're doing their payback to the federal government, and they only stay 2 years, at the most, and then they leave. And also in partnership with UNM, we're trying to work together to see if we can develop a medical residency program in the Shiprock area. And so they found through studies that most residents, wherever they do their residency, that they stay there. And so our participation is trying to connect those students with the communities. And it's not really about curriculum, but really to become immersed in those communities and help to figure out how they can help the communities or collaboratively work together on different projects. And so to me, I think of course, the medical doctors know their stuff, and that's what they're good at. But we really want people to stay in Shiprock, to stay on Navajo, because that's one of the core components is trust, right? And relationship and getting to know each other. And it's not just one way. And what I hear a lot is, it's like how can I build trust with the community? Like it's one way, but it's really, interactive, right? They have to build trust with us too. So it's a two-way street. And how can we do that? And I really appreciate this model.
Yeah, and I'm hearing so clearly from you that the rootedness in place also matters, right? How do we do this here in a way that works for us? Time is going to be the enemy here, but Bert, what about you?
I think leadership plays a big role in this. One of the things that I was brought on to do was to develop a program whereby we go to our members, i.e. people who have very complex care needs, and are usually, to be honest with you, the most expensive members that a health insurance or healthcare company addresses. And my job was to bring in the member voice into the way we either initiate new products or redesign products that are currently there. And it has been a fascinating journey. It is very iterative, to be honest with you. I mean, we're learning as we go, but I think the first part was making sure we had the accurate representation of the diversity of people who will be using our products. I think having this has also grown throughout the company, meaning I believe in our first year, we had 5 requests from different departments, and now we're dealing with literally 100 or so in a year. So things can and do change, but I think there has to be a commitment to this. And I think there also has to be what I call authenticity. I think you have to be truly, truly committed to the authentic voice and sustaining that authentic voice in all that you do. It's my biggest fear, because I've seen this happen. My biggest fear is that people will take these concepts and then they'll be reinterpreted to conform to current thought and current practices. So basically, we're giving new words to the same old, same old. So I believe that a true, authentic community, we should expect three things. One is, if you have an authentic community, you're going to see things differently. If it's truly authentic. Number two, you're going to respond differently because you're really hearing something you haven't heard or understood before. And finally, I think you're going to change in ways that you may not have ever considered. And I think I've seen that as we've initiated this it's called Member Voices throughout CCA, Commonwealth Care Alliance, that people are starting to realize that as the quote medical experts, maybe we don't have all that information about the lived environment, the social determinants of health, and other things that are really important, like value, sense of ownership, sense of trust, sense of being listened to and respond to. We don't necessarily understand how important some of those variables are. They're not superfluous. They're actually core to a lot of the work that we're trying to do.
Lovely. I love that attitude toward discovery and the unknowing of what's going to come next, but the co-production of that is really the important thing. Richard, you're going to have probably the last word on this panel, but I just maybe just bring up a theme in the chat about where does the resourcing of this figure into this work? The like follow the money in some ways. You've built an organization and founded one that wasn't on the map years ago, and now it is. And so if you could speak to this sort of the near edge of doing this work, but also building the resourcing commitments that are required to do it.
I think for me, I think it's important that one is that we trust our vision, where we're going with our work, if it's a community-based organization or if it's a hospital, and utilize this incredible model in our application for grants, for funding, and then having conversation with policymakers about acknowledging and accepting this model and community engagement. I think that is essential. We are, and the community members out there throughout this country and the world are really the teachers. And if we get this under our belt, we can educate the others in the systems that we constantly work in and are challenged by, and never take no for an answer. Because I think, again, this is a great opportunity to use what we have learned here, what we created from a lot of folks in the country throughout the various communities and barrios. And to utilize it as we move forward. So I'm going back to your original question. How do we educate the folks in the different fields, in different institutions? We got to speak up, move up, and educate as we go along.
Lovely. I'm going to turn now. Thanks to all of you for sharing your wisdom and for the work that you put into creating this. There will be more to come. This is imperfect and evolving, as you've all said. I'm going to turn now to Sergio Aguilar-Gachela and Monique Shaw, who've been our organizational champions of this from day one.